Okay, welcome back to our second hour for today. Fingers crossed that I've made the appropriate sacrifices here. So let me again try changing over to my mini here after doing a full reset. Okay, so let's make sure that that screen is available. There we go. Look at that. Okay, so the example here is, hopefully, if I go to my OneNote, you will notice that it's asking for a PIN number. So that's MAM in practice. Now, this mini is Azure AD joined, okay? But what you see on the screen is an example of MAM, which means if it was not Azure AD joined, then this could be a policy pushed out to protect corporate information. So again, as I mentioned yesterday, a lot of people give their devices to their kids. You don't want them messing with corporate data. So we can put a PIN number on it as well. Now, the other example that I tried to show you was I went into a corporate app. So I'm here in Edge. I'm going in here and I will copy that information. So I'm trying to copy that sentence, and let me go over to the standard Apple Notes. All right, so there's the non-corporate Apple Notes. And if I now paste that information in there, you'll see that it now says that my organization does not allow data to be pasted there. So that's an example of MAM for the policies that I have set up in my own production environment. And I think I deserve a round of applause for at least getting one of the demos to work. So again, hopefully that'll give you a bit better of an idea. Just goes to show that you probably shouldn't fiddle with the devices before doing a demo. So again, I just did a reset and came back to the way it was. So again, I appreciate your patience on that. All right, so before we continue on and we talk about or go over the MAM aspect, are there any questions on the MDM run through that I've just given you there? So hopefully this flow diagram, which I'll make available to you after the fact here, gives you a better idea of what I would consider a best practices approach to devices that you want to manage using MDM. So hopefully, again, remember that the idea here is you can mix and match as you want. You can put on any policies, you can have Intune, or you can have endpoint, and it's up to you. So that's why the value is of working out what works best for your own environment. Can you still use OneNote for personal use without entering a PIN? Correct. Yes, you can. So if I'm trying to access personal data, then that's not subject to an application policy, and I could go in and make that selection. But again, my advice is you don't want to get down to these sort of situations where can I do this? And again, my advice to you is generally is put all the corporate data in the Microsoft apps and lock them down with a policy. Don't mix and match. But the answer is yes, you can do that, and it does abide by it if you so choose. Any other questions? Okay, all right, so let us talk a little bit more about MAM. So what we'll do is we'll move our discussion of MAM over here to the left. All right, so what we're going to do over here now is look at our MAM environment. Okay, so again, remember that MAM is going to be governed by the type of operating system that we have. So there will be different policies for all the different operating systems that we have in play here. Okay, so please do keep that in mind. Now, the first policy to implement is the application policy. All right, so if we go into here, application policy. All right, so the idea is that if we go look at our devices here, go back to our controlling page, and we go into apps and we go into application protection policies. All right, and we create a policy for Windows 10, say, and we go in here and say Win 10 app protect. You'll notice down the bottom that I can choose whether it's already enrolled. So that's if the device already has MDM done, or if it's purely MAM. So let's just select pure MAM. We need now to, again, talk about the protected or the targeted apps. So that's the next thing we need to decide over here in our application section. Sorry, that should be application protection policy. Application protection policy. All right, so the next thing we need to decide in this flow here is what are the targeted apps, right? And in essence, these are the corporate apps, right? So what apps are going to be our corporate, considered to be our corporate apps? So typically this is going to be, Outlook and, Word, maybe Edge, and so on. Okay, so we need to decide what applications are considered corporate applications that will deal with corporate data. After we've done that, the next thing that we need to go in and define is our exempt apps. So is there any applications on our endpoints that we don't want to be subject to a policy here? So the example I could probably give you is a third-party browser, right? May also be a a third-party app as well. All right, so you would need to go in and define what applications. So remember, all of this is around the applications, okay? And that's what we need to decide here. So what is going to be our corporate apps? What is going to be our exempt apps? So the next thing that we need to decide and we need to work around is, okay, now that we've defined what can manage our corporate information, we now need to apply, right, our Windows information protection settings. Okay, now those were, just to remind you, let's go in here and we'll just go here and add the standard Microsoft ones. Go OK, go next, no exempt apps. Here's our Windows information protection. Now remember, our Windows information protection is going to enforce whether I can copy and paste information between corporate and non-corporate locations and applications. How do I want to deal with that? So that example I showed you at the beginning there was an example of this being set to block. So if I take data from inside a corporate app and try and put it in a non-corporate app, I get that text which says, nope, can't do that. Sorry, you're not allowed. We have the option to allow override, so you'll be prompted, and that will obviously be recorded in a log so that people can go and look at that and make a decision. All right, or you can set it to silent, which is just pure auditing. All right, and then we get into the more complex area here of defining what is our network boundary. So in essence, the way to think about this is, so we now need to, so then think of boundaries as a container, right? So we've got a list of applications from above, right? That's defining our corporate application, but what we want to do now is define a corporate bucket. Okay, so this is a corporate container versus a consumer container. Okay, so our corporate container will be something like OneDrive for Business, Office 365, SharePoint Online, blah, 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 blah. Okay, our non-corporate container could be, Dropbox, Gmail, whatever else that is defined as a consumer container. Okay. Now that's what this boundary defines. It helps us define basically this side of the ledger. What's considered, right? What's considered to be a corporate container. Everything else that I don't define as a corporate container is considered to be a consumer or non-corporate container. Okay, so that's what the boundary allows me to define. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I would set up a policy or settings in here, let's say, that would then say allow, right, corporate apps, right, to access corporate and consumer containers, which is sort of the standard, and prevent a non-corporate app from accessing a corporate container. Oops, and I've moved that down off the screen. Apologies for that. Okay, so they're the boundaries, right? So I've defined what is considered a corporate container, OneDrive for Business, Office 365, SharePoint Online, a non-corporate container being Dropbox, Gmail, consumer-grade accounts. And then what I've done here is defined a policy via settings that would allow, right? So the corporate application is allowed to access corporate and consumer containers, but the non-corporate application cannot access a corporate container. So what that means is that would then basically prevent, go back up here, this would prevent, things like Dropbox. So this would prevent information being sent to Dropbox, as we saw in the example that I provided. All right, so remember, this is all MAM. So this is preventing data from moving from a corporate defined container to a non-corporate container thanks to application MAM policies. Right, and we're able to do that on iOS, Android, and Windows 10 as well. So in a nutshell, there are some other things that we can do in here. Whoops, wrong color. There are some other things we can do in here. So let's just jump back to that thing here. So you'll see here that we also can control the data protection. We can talk about encryption keys. It does get quite granular here if you want to do it. So here's this access. So if I want to access corporate information, I can enforce a minimum number of characters for a PIN. And that's what you saw in the demo for my corporate data that I showed you just as we kicked off this session. All right, so I can make that 4. I can make that as long as I want, and I can get complex and say, look, it can't be just numbers, it can be letters, and that's where you would enforce that policy. And the idea behind that is, again, if the device is stolen and it's not a corporate managed device, it's preventing someone going into that corporate app and just opening it directly, because you know how many people don't have a PIN number or have 0000 or 1234 or whatever is their PIN number. So the idea with this is it's enforcing another level of security on the corporate applications on the device. And again, it's a policy. You need to decide, you need to talk to the customer and help them understand the benefits and how they want to secure it. But you can certainly go in and do that. And again, we target the groups that we want that to be assigned to, and then we create, and that is then going to go in and apply that protection policy to that environment. All right. Are there any questions on that before we move on to the app configuration policies? Any questions at all? Give us a thumbs up. Good to go if you're happy with that information. Okay, looks like most people are happy with it. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here of this device stuff. So again, bear with me. So we've done our app protection policy. The next one here is our app config policy. Okay, so we also need to think about the app deployment. Now, the app deployment was what I attempted to show you. That was that, Adobe deployment that I showed you initially. All right. So the idea would be is to think about what apps do I want on the devices? Do I want Intune to push them out for me? Do I want to be able to control it through Intune? And once I've obviously pushed them out, what config policy, right, are they going to take? So what settings are they going to take? So I go back into my console here. All right, so we talked about the applications here. Here was the where I pushed out the Adobe one that we talked about initially this morning, or first thing. Let's have a look. I don't think it's done anything there. Nope, I'll have to go and have a fiddle with that one. I'll get that working. And then we have that application on the device. And then if we want, we can go in and also control the configuration. So let's go in and just show you a configured. I think we showed you this yesterday, but if I go in here and put in Outlook iOS, for example, targeted selected apps, let's go Outlook. Okay, and iOS, iPad, go next, go next. Okay, and you'll see in here that I can go in and tweak all the Outlook settings. All right, and we did mention this yesterday because I remember turning off the focused inbox. So this is now the configuration settings for that application. All right, so MAM, we firstly went in and made sure that your app's in there that you want to manage with Intune, then set your protection policies of how the data is going to be allowed to move between corporate and non-corporate containers. And then you can also go in and set up the configuration options for you as well. Now, once we've done all that, that means that we now have, if we go back to our whiteboard here. All right, so in theory, okay, so if we head back over here, wherever that over here has ended up being. There we go, it's over here. All right, oh no, that's still, probably must be up here somewhere. There we go. All right, so we've done MDM and MAM now over on the left and the right of our environment. Okay, and we've now got that complete. So now we're pretty much in the environment where we now have full device management. Didn't take long, did it? Okay. So hopefully that diagram there or that flowchart gives you a bit better an idea. The challenge here is, as I said, there are lots and lots of options. There's a lot to work through. And as I recommended yesterday, just start off with, the MDM side of the house. Just start off with your compliance policy first. If you haven't done it before, just do a compliance policy because it will not make any changes. It will just assess the machine to determine whether it is compliant. From there, my advice would be is then look at doing these baselines and also the endpoint policy ones. And then you can start looking at the Intune configuration policies for iOS and Android. Once you've got that under control, that's when I would think about diving into MAM. MAM's requires a bit more, a bit better design, I suppose. It's sort of a different approach to manage because you're not managing the device, even though you're on a device sort of thing. So it's a little bit of a difference to what we're particularly used to coming, say, from a group policy background. All right, but you can certainly do that. So all of that's available to you, and it may look daunting, but at the end of the day, once you start doing it, once you start using this in depth, it becomes quite straightforward. It's just a matter of breaking it down, keeping it simple, and then determining, what your best practices will be, what you're comfortable with doing, what works for the customer. There's going to be a general baseline consistency, commonality for most customers. 80/20, most customers are going to fall into, they're going to want it this way. This is the standard offering we have out of the box. That's what I would be going out and deploying. And basically sort of after that, then you can provide any customizations for any sort of unique needs that customer may actually need. All right, so that really is the core of device management, both devices and applications in the environment. And as I mentioned here, the place to start is to go to endpoint.microsoft.com, get your devices in there, start doing device management, then move to application management. And again, make sure that you have a look at the baselines and the endpoint security, because this is the direction that Microsoft is largely moving into. All right, so is everybody happy with all of that? Do you have any specific questions before we start moving on and addressing another component here? Are there any questions around the, like I said, MDM, MAM, Intune policies, all of that sort of stuff? Again, we'll cover bits and pieces in a little bit more depth, but is everybody comfortable they've got the basic concepts, as they apply here, and feel a bit confident that they have more information and a better understanding than they did before we started yesterday? You can give me a thumbs up. There are a couple of thumbs up there. I'm sorry, I must have missed the answer to my question earlier. Okay. Who is allowed to override these blocks? What blocks are you talking about exactly, Curtis? What blocks are you talking about? Oh, you're talking about where I allowed so you are talking about, I assume, let me just go back in here, app protection policy, go into here, go into properties, come on, and go into here. I assume you're talking about this. Is that what you're talking about, Curtis? So this is the user. The user is allowed to override. Okay, so MAM is basically saying, is the user allowed to move data from a corporate to a non-corporate location? And you can either prompt them so that they can push a button and say, yes, I understand, I want to proceed, or you can block. So this is all at the user level. It's not like UAC in any way, shape, or form. It's basically a prompt in the middle to say, you know what, you're about to move data from a company to a non-company thing, and that's sort of against our policy. Do you really want to do that? So my advice is you don't give users that choice. You generally just block them. But if you want, you can do an override. So that's what that is. Okay, Brendan's asking, can you configure apps to install on demand? Not quite sure what you mean by on demand. That you would be using something like Windows Virtual Desktop. That's where you would do the apps on demand. So that's not an Intune. An Intune is a deployment, right? If you're talking about app streaming, you would do that using Windows Virtual Desktop, and it certainly can be done so that there's an icon on the desktop, the user clicks on it, and they are then taken into a virtual session to run that application, which actually runs on a VM in the background. So, there's not a concept here of on demand. There's a concept of there's an icon on my desktop. When I run it as a user, I see no difference, but it's actually running on a virtual machine streamed to me from a data center. So hopefully that answers that question. Are there any other questions before we move on? All right, I assume that it's all thumbs up. We're all good to go. Okay, all right, well, I'll take that as a yes, we are. All right, so let us talk about Autopilot. So the idea with Autopilot is that it's a way to reduce or to help you better deploy Windows devices, right? So first out of the box is that Autopilot is designed for Windows devices at this stage. All right, so it's only designed for Windows 10 devices at this stage. Okay. So the old way of doing deployment was that you would, get a device, you would then create a custom image, install the software that you required on it. You would then go and image that machine, take that image and blow it onto similar machines. And that is time, money, effort. And in my experience, the further we get down the track, the more difficult that becomes because more and more stuff is tied to the hardware, the licensing, and so on. So the modern approach to this is basically to have the device unboxed. So the user buys their machine and receives it and then opens it, connect to the internet. They answer, or they log in with who they are, their corporate ID, and then all of the stuff then basically is deployed for them. So think about Autopilot as doing the manual Azure AD join, right? So where I did yesterday when I joined the machine, that virtual machine to Azure AD, right? So quick history lesson. If I go in here, so hopefully everybody yesterday remembers I went into this machine, which was standalone. I went into change the account settings here, and I added this option in here, right? So I went connect, and I joined it to an Azure AD install, right? So that was that manual process. So effectively what Autopilot is going to do is it's going to do that for me. It's going to do that in an automated way, which we'll look at in more detail. Now, once I've done an Azure AD join, what then happens? All right, so once I've done a Azure AD join, can everybody see the screen, or did it just go black? Everybody still see my screen there? Probably. Hopefully. Just give me a thumbs up or in the chat there. Can you still see the screen? I think you can still see my screen. Yeah, okay. All right. So think of the Autopilot largely as replacing that manual join to Azure AD. Once that Azure AD join is complete, what then happens? Well, then your compliance policies kicks in. Then your configuration and your endpoint and your baseline and your applications and your deployments and your app protection policies, all of those kick in. So all Autopilot is doing is making it easier to get machines onto Azure AD. Once they're on Azure AD, then all the policies we've talked about, the application packages, the deployments, the security, the configuration, all gets pushed down to the machine. All right, so Autopilot is a service which makes it easy, effectively, to join Azure AD. And then once it's on Azure AD, then all the software configurations that you have set up will be pushed onto that device. Okay. Okay, so the idea here is that we want to be able to manage their devices, and we can now do that with not ever seeing the device, with not ever touching it. Now, many of you may be aware that a lot of people have an emotional attachment to their devices, typically think iPhones, but again, people are buying machines, desktops that they feel reflects their personality, and if you are spending money on that and you want a lot of people want that unboxing experience. Now, if you don't believe me, go onto YouTube and do a search for unboxing. There's a million videos of people opening boxes and oohing and ahhing over the latest hardware. So these devices have become very personal. In a lot of cases, people are wanting to buy their own device. I mean, I'm sure many people out there have had the situation where the CEO says, yes, but I want this machine, that machine, I want it in black carbon and I want this, and you might not be able to supply it, or you might struggle to supply it, or you might not be able to supply it at the price point that the customer wants. So again, the idea here is we can allow the management of the device through its life cycle without ever having to see and access the device. We can do it all remotely. So the idea is we can procure it from somebody like Ingram, get them to ship it out, and then we can go through this automated process. And when they open the lid, it will do an automated Azure AD join for us straight away. So what's going to happen is you want to take a Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise operating system device. We want to add the software, we want to add the settings and do any updates, add any features, and of course we want the user data to also appear on there, and it's ready for productive use. So it comes out or comes from the vendor or comes from the distributor as a optimized Windows 10. The user opens it up, goes through a identification process, and then after that, all of that information is pushed out by policies that you have created and what we have, again, already spoken about. Okay. Now, most of you hopefully have devices which are beyond 1703 now. The main limitation is that you will need a license that supports the autopilot capability. And as I've mentioned, Microsoft 365 Business Premium will support that. Right? So all the enterprise SKUs and Business Premium are going to support that capability. So the way that it works here is that the hardware vendor will send the ID, so think hashes, unique identifiers of the devices that have been purchased for the customer, to the IT administrator. And I certainly hope everybody here wears a cape, at least inside the office when you are doing your job, because otherwise it just wouldn't match this slide. And then what you would do is you would take those IDs and you would upload them into the customer's portal. I'll show you where we do that, but just think of using those unique identifiers in the customer's portal. So the customer's portal knows that these machines are coming and will be connecting to their environment. And you also then add a configuration profile. Now, the configuration profile determines what happens at boot. Do you want to be prompted about privacy settings? Do you want to be prompted to have different keyboards? Do you want to be prompted, those normal Windows 10 setup questions? We can bypass all of those. So that's in that config profile, which we'll look at. Then, with all of that profile and the unique identifiers in the Microsoft environment for that tenant, the device can be shipped directly to the customer, right? Straight out of the factory, straight to the customer. The customer opens the device connects to the internet. It then determines that that machine has been connected or has been listed inside the tenant in question, and then commences that self-deployment process. It's really as simple as that. Now, the thing that's changed of late is that no longer do you as an IT provider have to upload those IDs yourself after getting them from distributors. So the good people at Ingram can actually upload those into your customers' tenants for you, so that it's one less step that you have to take care of. All you need to worry about then is the profile, setting up the autopilot profile. So again, speak to the people at Ingram about how that happens, what devices are supported. They will know better on how that actually transpires inside, the environment and the procurement direction, right? So again, I can't tell you what it is. Speak to the good people at Ingram for all the details. Now, it is possible to take IDs from existing machines. So if you've got a range of machines that have been repurposed, think like a school. So we have all these machines and we want to repurpose them or include them. We can get them into Autopilot by running a PowerShell script. We'll see how our machine, a demo machine, whether that's in there, and we'll see if we can run the PowerShell script if we need to do that. And again, hopefully everybody's got a relatively current version of Windows 10. You won't have any dramas with it. Now, the idea is that we want to be able to deploy our settings, configuration, and software to our devices, no matter what they are. So typically they're going to be desktops, but they could also be, phones, iPads, all those sort of things as well. And this is having the discussion with the customer and helping them understand, okay, this is what's possible. How do we want to approach it? What sort of level of lockdown? Are we going to support BYOD? What are we going to do? What settings make sense in the environment? This is the value add that you are going to provide around, okay, these are the policies that we basically, said that we're going to apply to your environment, okay? And you can then manage, maintain that going forward. And that's going to mean that devices are pretty much secure out of the box if you've done all the right things here. Now, Autopilot can be administered in a number of different ways. As with everything Microsoft, there's not necessarily one way to do it. My advice to you is that the Intune, okay, Microsoft Intune or Endpoint Manager is by far the best way to do it because it gives you the most options. But you can do it in Partner Center. You can do it in the Microsoft Store for Business if you want to, and you can do it from the admin portal directly in Microsoft 365 Business. But my advice to you would be is to do it inside the Endpoint Manager environment. You'll see that if you go to Devices and look at Windows Enrollment, down the bottom of the page, which we looked at yesterday, you'll see that there is the Autopilot deployment options, the device, deployment profile, devices, and you can actually connect it to your on-prem AD if you want. Now, inside here, when you look at a profile, you can choose these options. So as you mentioned yesterday, you can turn off the need to agree to the licensing. You can, skip the privacy settings. You can determine whether the user account that joins is a standard user or admin. You can do what's known as a white glove out of the box. So let's say that you do have devices for customers that do need custom software or some peculiar environment, or they've got low bandwidth. What you can do as a provider, you can have the distributor send you the machines. You can then boot them up with a generic login. You can then update them, put them on your fast internet to get them up to speed, and then you can repackage them. Think sysprep style thing. And then when the customer gets it, they only have to do the deltas. So think of that as the white glove option. And I believe that Ingram also have that capability as well to do a white glove option as well if you want to do that. So again, for all things Autopilot, go and speak to the good people at Ingram about what options are available to you. However, we want to create a policy. We can have multiple policies. We can have one for different groups of users, one for different groups of devices if we want. We'll have a look at that in a bit more detail shortly. Then the way that you add the device is effectively uniquely identified by a serial number and effectively a hardware hash. So that's a unique identifier for the machine. We can get this with a CSV file. We can upload the CSV file into our Endpoint Manager portal, and then we will see a list of all the machines in our environment there that have been recognized and registered with Autopilot. Now, what you can do is that you will find is that if you've manually joined machines, that over time, they will again appear in Autopilot automatically. So this is known as the automatic harvesting of the details, but you certainly can do it manually if you want. But typically, once the devices are in there, they're automatically going to be added to Autopilot for you. So you can go in and manage them from that point forward. So just to give you a quick idea of what the Autopilot sequence is like, so the person boots the machine, they enter their language of choice, connect to their internet, and then they would be prompted to enter their credentials here. So this is their logging into their Azure AD here, okay? Now, you'll notice that this also has been branded. So we've got the logo, we've also got the company name in there. So this is why it's also very important to make sure that you are doing the branding for the tenant so it's recognizable by the customer. Now, once the end user puts in their credentials, login and password, it will complete the login and first run Windows experience, and then they'll be placed on the desktop. Now, at this point, the policies, the compliance policies, the configuration policies, the app configuration and deployment policies will all kick in and start pushing that out to the device. All right, so the idea here is, again, is we take a machine, we make it easy to do an Azure AD join with Autopilot, and once that is complete, then all the policies, the deployment policies and the security policies you've enabled will also be deployed to that device, and it will be ready to use. Now, if you want, you can do a white glove where I said you can bring it in-house, get an update as close to complete as possible, and then ship it out to the customer. So they only have to do the deltas, your choice. But generally, most of the stuff doesn't take too long, unless it's, unless you've got some super huge application that you want to install. Now we can register, as I mentioned, existing devices. We can go to a PowerShell gallery and just download that, run a couple of very simple commands to create that CSV file, and then upload that CSV file into the portal so it is then recognized by the environment. And the process and the steps are, I register the device with Autopilot, I assign a profile to that device that is now registered. That device then connects to a network, the internet, and authenticates as a user, and then it is deployed from that point forward. So it's really that straightforward. So again, some resources for you. I'll make sure that you get access to the slides after the fact. So if we go quickly in here and just have a look at this, so if we go into our devices, we go into our enrolled devices, and we go to Windows enrollment. So you'll see down the bottom here, we've got our Windows Autopilot, our devices, and the connection. So if we go and look at the devices, you'll see here is the list that I have here. So these are 2 physical machines that I've got, and you'll see here are the 2 virtual machines that I've connected to the environment. So they already have the serial number and all the details. If I click on one of those, you'll see that it currently hasn't got a user assigned to it. Gives me all the details. I can give the device a name here, so when it is deployed, it will have a device name. I can put a tag on it as well, and what I can do is I can select the device and I can actually assign it to the user. So what that means is now the user doesn't even have to log into the device during that first run. So if I assign a user to a device, when I autopilot it, the Autopilot will know and configure it automatically for that user. So what I'm going to do here is, let me just configure both of these for my user. I'll explain to you why I'm doing this shortly. So that's how we get the devices in there. Now, if you want to import, basically all you do is push the button and select a CSV file which was created by PowerShell or has the appropriate settings in there, the hash and the serial number, and then those devices will then appear in the list. We can export that as well, and we can also synchronize, which we'll look at the registered devices in our environment compared to what we have in Autopilot, and then we can make sure that all the registered devices are already ready for Autopilot, even if we didn't use those initially. Now, we need to apply a profile, as I mentioned. So if we go into looking at a profile here, okay, so what I should do actually, let me go and create a new profile. That's probably a better one. So let's create a new profile for Windows PC. So let's call this IM profile. So I can convert all targeted devices to Autopilot here if I want. So I'll go yes for that, go next. And I can say, is the deployment mode user-driven or self-deploying? So think self-deploying as a kiosk, a front of office style machine or signage or something. Do I want to join to Azure AD? You'll notice that I can also do Autopilot with an Azure AD hybrid join as well. More complicated, more steps involved, but it is possible to use Autopilot with hybrid Azure AD join if you want. You'll see here I can turn off the license terms, turn off the privacy, hide the change account options, all right, hide all that, make it a standard user account, allow white box out of the box experience. So that's sort of an interim step to update it if it needs to. I'm not going to do that in this case. The region, the language, again, I'll just pick that up on the operating system. I will configure automatically configure the keyboard, and I can also put in here a device template. So I can go in here and say my machines are going to be my company dash random number if I want to do that. All right. So then I go next. And then I say, okay, again, who am I going to apply this to? So let me add this to my groups. I'll go in here and add this. So again, I'm targeting this at a group, review and create, and then I'm off to the races. So now I can have all of these profiles targeted at devices and users, as I can just about everything else. Now, where's the benefit of that? Well, if we go into devices, just as we finish off here, and we pick this device, which I think is the one I was working on. So that one there is, if I'm not mistaken, is this one here, right? So you'll see here that it's already added to the environment. I've got my hardware, the software, the policies, but because now hopefully this is an autopilot machine, I can go in here and I can go to the option to autopilot reset. Now that's going to shut down the machine and it's going to go through a complete autopilot as though it was a new machine out of the box. So I'm going to be able to re-provision that for anyone. So think of this as Betty leaves, hands in her PC, her corporate Surface PC. You can go in and select this option here to do an autopilot reset, which will set it back to factory fresh out of the box, and then you can give that to Bill so that Bill can log in and again start from that point going forward. Okay, so I'm going to do a reset here. Right, so you'll see the autopilot reset is initiated. I will go over to this machine, right, and what I'll do is I will force this to do a sync, and then what we should see over the break and happening in the background eventually is that this machine will shut down. It will basically do a Windows style reset, and then it will come back and go through that autopilot process. So let me just go in here and force this to update any policies. Sync this. And then we can sit back and watch when this does kick in. I'll normally get a notification down here that'll tell me that it's about to kick it in. It takes a couple of minutes to do that because it's got to do something at the back end as well. If I did a reboot, it will then commence that autopilot reset pretty much immediately, but I'll wait and see if the message does appear. All right, Benjamin has a question. There you go. See, it's about to sign me out. Sorry, I'll come back to that. See, it's about to sign me out, so the autopilot stuff is about to go. So what I'll do is I will beat it to the punch, and it's now logged me out of my remote session. So let me just log me back into that remote session. So you can have a look at it. Obviously telling me that I need to I just log in. So I'm just logging back into that Hyper-V machine. What's it called again? Not having a good day with the demos here today. Must be Friday the 13th. Hopefully it's allowing me back in. There we go. Okay, so if I go back to this machine, which was going to tell me it was going to reboot, if I do a reset, what I should see is once it starts rebooting, it should start going through that Windows reset process and eventually come into autopilot. So back to Benjamin's question. Does the convert to autopilot setting stay with the machine? As long as the machine is inside the tenant, it's always associated with the machine. So I'm now resetting the machine. As provided the machine is still inside the tenant and identified there, it's going to be able to be provisioned with autopilot and the tenant will know about it. So within the tenant, yes, it will know that it's there. So we'll see here that, as I said, I've rebooted the machine and now it's going through a Windows reset process. It's going to tidy up Windows, do a cleaning, clean all that sort of stuff up, and then we'll be able to go along. So it's just doing a reset of the PC, as you'll see here. That'll take a little while, obviously, because it's a VM as well, but that's how easy it is. So the idea is you buy a machine, it comes with autopilot. The autopilot is then, given to a user who then logs in. All your policies settings is deployed, that the machine is used by that user. When they leave, you do an autopilot reset, hand it off, or they then give that to the next user. You're off to the races, and you don't really need to see or touch the machines anymore. All right, we are getting close to time to take a break again. Are there any questions on anything that I've covered there before we look at taking our scheduled break? Any questions at all? If there aren't any questions, just give us a thumbs up. Good to go there, and we'll start the clock and take our 10-minute break. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm going to push the button here, stop the recording.